Somewhere down the hall, a stretcher rattled briefly, then vanished behind swinging doors. Christina Hale walked through it all with steady steps. Her shoes made no sound on the polished floor. She moved as if she belonged to the building itself, as if she had always been there and always would be. Navy blue scrubs hung neatly from her shoulders, unwrinkled despite the long night. Her badge rested flat against her chest. Christina Hale, RN. No titles. No honors. No indication of anything remarkable. She paused outside Trauma Bay 3 and checked the monitor through the glass. Heart rate elevated but controlled. Blood pressure holding. For now. The patient, a middle-aged man recovering from emergency abdominal surgery, shifted slightly in his sleep. Christina adjusted the IV flow by instinct, more than calculation. She had already measured the trend an hour ago. Easy, she murmured, not sure if he could hear her. Sometimes they did. She documented the adjustment quickly, precisely. Her notes were always clean. No wasted words, no dramatics. Across the nurses' station, a pair of residents whispered over a tablet. "Is she new?" one asked quietly. "She's been here months," the other replied. "Night shift, keeps to herself." Christina didn't look up. She had learned long ago that invisibility could be useful. The ER belonged to Dr. Leonard Price. At least, that was how he carried himself. He strode through the department just before morning rounds, white coat unbuttoned, stethoscope slung like a symbol of rank rather than a tool. He was respected, feared, occasionally admired. His reputation rested on speed and confidence. Decisions made quickly, delivered loudly. Price stopped at the central workstation and scanned the patient board. "Why hasn't bed 12 been prepped for imaging?" he demanded. A resident straightened. "We were waiting on labs." Price scoffed. "Waiting gets people killed." Christina stepped closer, voice calm but firm. "Labs are delayed because his hematocrit dropped again." "CT contrast could worsen." Price cut her off with a raised hand. "I wasn't asking you." The words landed cleanly, without malice. Worse, without thought. Christina nodded once and stepped back. No reaction, no embarrassment, no apology expected. Around them, the rhythm of the ER continued. Gurneys rolled. Phones rang. Someone laughed too loudly at a joke meant to bleed off stress. Price pointed at the board again. "Let's move. We're already behind." But she kept that thought to herself. She had worked with men like Price before. They mistook calm for compliance, silence for ignorance, experience for routine. They saw scrubs and assumed limits. Christina had learned, early in her career, that correcting the wrong person at the wrong time could end more than a shift. So she chose her moments carefully. She spoke when it mattered, and when it didn't, she watched. She always watched. During a brief lull near sunrise, Christina restocked a crash cart with practiced efficiency. Each item placed exactly where her hand expected it to be. Epinephrine, amiodarone, intubation kit. A junior nurse nearby watched her. "You ever think about switching to days?" the nurse asked. Christina shook her head. "Nights suit me." The nurse hesitated. "You don't get tired?" Christina smiled faintly. "Everyone gets tired," she said. She didn't say more. The first hint that something was different about Christina came during a routine code drill. The scenario was simple. Simulated cardiac arrest. Standard response. The room filled quickly. Residents barked orders. A mannequin lay motionless on the bed. "Epi, 1 milligram," a resident called. Christina paused. "That dose won't circulate effectively with his pressure that low," she said quietly. The resident frowned. "Protocol says." Christina met his eyes, unflinching. Protocol assumes a controlled environment. A beat of silence followed. Then Dr. Price laughed. "This is a drill, Nurse Hale. Let's not improvise." Christina nodded. But later, when the drill ended, the instructor pulled the resident aside. "She was right," he said. "You missed the nuance." The resident glanced back at Christina, who was already cleaning up, already gone. There were other moments. A security officer once noticed how she positioned herself during a combative patient incident. Angled stance, weight balanced, hands visible but ready. You train? He asked. Christina shook her head. Just paying attention. A paramedic, overhearing her give instructions during a chaotic transfer, asked quietly, "Where'd you learn triage like that?" "Experience," she replied. Always the same answer. Always incomplete. At 6 o'clock, the hospital lights shifted subtly, brightening as day staff filtered in. The air changed. Louder voices. Faster footsteps. Christina reviewed her final charts. Everything normal. Almost. She noticed it before the monitors did. A subtle irregularity in the incoming EMS channel. Not panic, not confusion. Urgency. She lifted her head. The radio crackled. County to Mercy General. Stand by for priority inbound. Military transport. Multiple casualties. Christina straightened. Across the ER, Dr. Price looked up sharply. What kind of military? Unknown. At this time. Christina's fingers tightened briefly on the edge of the desk. Unknown was never good. She moved toward the trauma bays without being told. Somewhere deep in her memory, a different kind of alarm was already sounding. The announcement rippled outward from the ER like a pressure wave. Military transport. Priority inbound. Those words rearranged the hospital's posture. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. Screens were tapped awake. Chairs scraped back as doctors and nurses shifted from routine to readiness. Dr. Leonard Price was already issuing orders. Clear trauma 1 and 2. Notify radiology. I want blood ready. O negative. Double units. Move. Residents scattered. Christina didn't wait. She crossed to the trauma bays and began preparing them the way she always did, methodically, without flourish. Oxygen lines checked. Suction tested. Crash carts repositioned closer to the doors. She adjusted the lighting, lowering glare, eliminating shadows. A day shift nurse stepped beside her. Do you know what's coming? Not yet. But her eyes lingered on the entrance doors a fraction longer than necessary. She could feel it now, the tightening in the air, the sense of something accelerating beyond normal emergency parameters. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. At the main workstation, administrators arrived, ties loosened, jackets still on. One of them leaned toward Price. Military means jurisdiction issues, he said quietly. We need to be careful. Price waved him off. We treat the patient. That's it. The administrator hesitated. And if it's a classified operation? We're a hospital, not a base. Christina heard the exchange as she passed behind them. She said nothing. She had learned that when civilians talked about classified operations, they rarely understood what that actually meant. The EMS radio crackled again. Mercy General, be advised. 1 adult male, 1 pediatric. Adult is active duty military. Pediatric is civilian. Both critical. The word pediatric snapped heads around. Price swore under his breath. We're not set for a child, he said. Get pediatrics down here now, a resident asked. What kind of injuries? Static, then blast-related, shrapnel, unknown internal damage. Christina stopped walking. Blast injuries were rarely simple. They hid. They lied. They waited. She moved to the supply cabinet and pulled pediatric airway equipment without being asked. Her hands moved faster now, still controlled but sharper, like a blade freshly honed, a senior nurse noticed. You think it'll be that bad? Christina met her eyes. Yes. The first sound of the convoy reached them through the walls. Not sirens. Low at first, then rising. The thrum of helicopters vibrating through glass and steel. The ER doors rattled faintly in their frames. Someone whispered, That's not medevac. Price frowned. How many? No one answered. Christina closed her eyes briefly. 8 seconds. That was how long she allowed herself. Then she opened them and stepped forward. The doors burst open in a rush of sound and motion. 2 men in military fatigues pushed the first gurney. Their faces were smeared with dirt and something darker. One of them had blood soaking through his sleeve, but he didn't look at it. His focus never left the child on the stretcher. She was small, too small for the chaos around her. Her skin was pale, lips tinged blue. A hastily applied bandage wrapped her torso, already soaked through. The monitor beeped erratically. Behind her came the second gurney, an adult male unconscious, face obscured by an oxygen mask. Shrapnel wounds peppered his chest and legs. His uniform bore no insignia. Only one patch remained intact. An American flag. The men pushing the stretchers moved with urgency, but also restraint. Controlled panic. The kind that came from discipline fighting terror. Trauma 1 and 2, Price barked. Move, move. The child was wheeled into Trauma 1. Christina followed. Inside, the room exploded into activity. Vitals called out. Gloves snapped on. Orders shouted. Pulse weak. Pressure dropping. Airway compromised. Christina positioned herself at the head of the bed automatically, hands steady as she assessed the child's breathing. Too shallow. Too fast. She glanced at the monitor. Oxygen saturation was plummeting. Prepare for intubation, Price ordered. A resident hesitated. Her anatomy. We don't have time. Christina leaned in closer, eyes scanning the child's chest. There it was. A subtle asymmetry, one side rising slower than the other. She spoke quietly. Possible tension pneumothorax. Price shook his head. We don't have imaging yet. We won't get it in time. He turned sharply. You are not leading this. Christina didn't argue. She reached for a needle. Stop. Price's hand closed around her wrist. The room froze. You do not perform invasive procedures without authorization, he said, voice cold. Christina met his gaze. She's crashing. She's a child. She's dying. A beat, another resident whispered. Her heart rate. The monitor alarm screamed. Bradycardia. The child's chest barely moved now. Price hesitated. That hesitation lasted less than a second. It was enough. Christina pulled free. She acted with absolute certainty. Needle in, angle precise. The child gasped. A sound so small it almost vanished under the alarms. Almost. Oxygen saturation ticked upward. Slowly. Reluctantly. The room exhaled. Price stared at the monitor, then at Christina. What did you just do? He demanded. Christina was already moving to ventilation support, adjusting pressure by feel rather than number. Saving her life, she said simply. Security arrived moments later. Administrators followed close behind. This nurse overstepped, Price said sharply. Remove her. Christina stepped back from the bed. Gloves stained red. She removed them carefully. The child was breathing. That was enough. As security guided her out, Christina didn't look back. She didn't need to. Behind her, the child's heartbeat continued. Steady, alive. In the hallway, the sound of helicopters grew louder. Not leaving, arriving. Christina paused as the doors closed behind her. For the first time since the call came in, her calm fractured, just slightly, because she recognized that sound, and she knew what came next. The door shut behind Christina with a soft final click. The hallway outside Trauma 1 felt suddenly distant, like the aftermath of an explosion heard from too close. The alarms inside were muffled now, reduced to dull, pulsing echoes through reinforced walls. Security didn't release her immediately. One officer stood near the door, arms crossed. Another spoke into his radio in low tones, eyes never leaving her face. Hospital administration wants her contained, he said. Contained. Christina stood with her hands loosely at her sides. Her breathing was steady again. The moment had passed. The child was alive. That was what mattered. A nurse she recognized. Day shift. Senior approached cautiously. Christina, are you okay? She's stabilizing. Keep pressure low on ventilation. The nurse blinked. You're not even in there. Christina met her eyes. They'll follow the numbers. But watch her chest rise. If it becomes uneven again, don't wait. The nurse hesitated, then nodded sharply and turned back toward the trauma bay. Security noticed the exchange. Ma'am, you can't be giving instructions. Christina said nothing. Dr. Price emerged moments later, face flushed, white coat spattered. That was reckless, he said, pointing at her. You jeopardized the hospital. I saved a child, Christina replied calmly. Price laughed once, sharply. That's not your call. It was, she said. The administrator stepped between them. This isn't the time, he said. We'll address this formally. Price turned away. Get her off the floor. They escorted Christina to a small consultation room near the administrative wing. Windowless, beige walls, one table, 3 chairs. She sat without being asked. Her hands rested on the table, fingers lightly interlaced. There was dried blood beneath her nails. No one offered her water. The administrator cleared his throat. You violated protocol. Christina nodded. You performed an invasive procedure on a minor without authorization. Yes. You placed the hospital at legal risk. Christina lifted her eyes. The child would have died. The administrator's jaw tightened. That's not the point. Christina said nothing. Dr. Price leaned against the wall, arms crossed. You don't get to play hero because you think you know better, he said. This isn't a battlefield. Christina looked at him for a long moment. Then she spoke. No, she said. It isn't. The words landed heavier than they should have. Outside the room, the hospital shifted again. Footsteps multiplied. Voices dropped. The hum of helicopters deepened, no longer fading but hovering. Constant. Security radios crackled with unfamiliar call signs. A nurse rushed past the glass window, eyes wide. Why are there armed men in the lobby? She whispered to no one. The administrator stiffened. Armed men? He repeated. Price frowned. What kind? No insignia, but there, not hospital security. In Trauma 1, the child stabilized further. A pediatric surgeon finally arrived, breathless, shaken. She shouldn't be alive, he murmured, scanning the monitor. That intervention? Who did it? No one answered him. Back in the consultation room, Christina closed her eyes briefly. The rotors outside were closer now. She could tell by the vibration pattern. Lower altitude, tighter formation. Not evacuation. Arrival. A knock came at the door. Not polite. Measured. Security opened it halfway. A man stood there in plain clothes, posture unmistakable. He scanned the room with one glance. I'm looking for Christina Hale. The administrator stood abruptly. This area is restricted. The man produced a badge. Not local, not hospital. Federal. I don't need your permission. He stepped inside and faced Christina. For the first time since being escorted out, Christina stood. The man studied her for a moment longer than necessary. Then he nodded once. She's with us now. Price bristled. On what authority? The man turned slowly. National. Christina picked up her badge from the table. She clipped it back onto her scrubs. The man held the door open. Ma'am, he said. Christina walked past the administrator, past Price, without another word. In the hallway, the sounds of boots echoed in controlled cadence. Ahead, the ER doors opened again. This time, not for patients, but for command. The hospital lobby no longer felt like a place of healing. It felt like a secured zone. Christina stepped out of the administrative corridor and into a space transformed by quiet force. Men stood at measured distances from one another, not clustered, not casual. Their clothes were civilian, but their posture wasn't. Hands rested where weapons would be, even when none were visible. Eyes tracked movement automatically, without drama. No one raised their voice. That was the most unsettling part. The federal agent who had retrieved her walked half a step ahead, clearing a path without speaking. Staff members flattened themselves instinctively against walls. A few whispered questions followed them like nervous static. What's happening? Is this real? Who are they? She didn't slow. At the edge of the lobby, the sound of rotors pressed harder against the glass. A deep, rhythmic thudding that resonated through bone more than ear. The automatic doors slid open once, then stayed open. Outside, 2 matte black helicopters hovered low over the landing zone, rotors slicing the morning air into violent pieces. Armed personnel secured the perimeter, with disciplined speed, movements economical, practiced. A man stepped forward from the group. He wore no rank, no insignia, just a dark jacket zipped halfway up, hands bare despite the cold. His hair was cropped short, his face unreadable. When he saw Christina, he stopped. He didn't salute. He didn't need to. "Is the child stable?" he asked. Christina nodded once. For now, he exhaled, slow and controlled. Good. Behind him, a second man spoke quietly into a radio. "Angel 6 is confirmed on site." The words were not meant to be heard. They were, anyway. Inside the ER, Dr. Price watched the scene unfold through the glass doors, disbelief hardening into something closer to fear. "This is insane," he muttered. "This is a hospital." A senior nurse didn't look at him. "She saved that kid," the nurse said quietly. "Whatever this is, it's because of that." Price scoffed, but the sound lacked conviction. Christina was guided toward Trauma 2, where the adult soldier lay unconscious. The federal agent spoke again, low and precise. "He's a commander," he said. "His team is particular." "I know." The agent paused mid-step and glanced at her. "You do?" Christina didn't elaborate. They entered the trauma bay. The atmosphere shifted immediately. The room was quieter now, controlled, tense. Two armed men stood near the door, scanning corners. Medical staff worked with careful efficiency, aware they were being watched by people who measured seconds differently. The soldier's vitals flickered across the monitor. He was alive. Barely. A SEAL medic stepped aside as Christina approached. "Pressures unstable," he said. "Internal bleeding suspected." Christina studied the readings. "Where's the shrapnel cluster?" The medic blinked. "Upper left quadrant." She nodded. "You need to adjust compression. He's compensating wrong." The medic didn't question her. He moved. Dr. Price arrived moments later, white coat stiff with anger. "This is my department," he said sharply. "You don't just take over." The man in the dark jacket turned to face him. "Actually," he said calmly, "they do." Price faltered. "Excuse me?" The man stepped closer, voice still level. "This patient outranks you. So does she." He gestured toward Christina. The room went still. Christina moved to the bedside. She didn't announce herself. She didn't ask permission. She placed 2 fingers against the soldier's neck, then adjusted the IV flow. Her movements precise, economical. She leaned in close to his ear. Her voice was barely audible. "You're not done yet." The soldier stirred. His eyelids fluttered. Then his lips moved. Just once. The SEAL medic stiffened. He recognized her, the medic whispered. Dr. Price stared. "How?" he demanded. Outside the trauma bay, administrators gathered in whispered panic. "This is spiraling," one said. "We need legal involved. We need to know who she is." The federal agent turned to them. "You don't." They fell silent. In Trauma 1, the child's condition wavered again. The pediatric surgeon hesitated. "Pressure's dropping," he said. "If we intervene again." Christina appeared at the doorway. "Prepare for secondary decompression," she said. The surgeon bristled. "You're not—" A SEAL stepped forward. "She is." The surgeon swallowed. "Do it," he said. Christina stepped in. Her hands moved with the same certainty as before. The child stabilized. Again. Outside, more vehicles arrived. Unmarked, quiet, the hospital had become something else entirely. A node in a network far larger than itself. The man in the dark jacket approached her. "They're asking for you," he said. "Who?" "Everyone." Christina wiped her hands clean and nodded once. As she walked toward the corridor, the weight of eyes followed her. Not curiosity anymore. Recognition. The corridor outside the trauma bays had become a holding lane for authority. Men in plain clothes stood shoulder-width apart, not blocking passage, but controlling it. Hospital staff slowed unconsciously as they passed, voices lowering, eyes flicking toward Christina and then away again. She felt it. The shift. Moments earlier, she had been a problem to be contained. Now, she was a variable no one understood. The man in the dark jacket stopped near a glass-walled conference room. Inside, several figures waited. A mix of military bearing and civilian attire. No uniforms. No visible ranks. Power didn't always announce itself. Before you go in, the man said quietly, I need to be clear. Christina turned to face him. You're not in trouble, he said, but you're about to be recognized. Christina held his gaze. I didn't ask for that. I know. Inside the room, conversation stopped instantly. 5 people stood or sat around the table. One woman closed a tablet, another man set his phone face down. A third, older, silver-haired, watched Christina with a long, measuring look. No one spoke at first. Then the older man nodded. Lieutenant Commander Hale, he said. The title landed softly, but it landed. Christina didn't correct him. She didn't salute. She simply inclined her head. The man gestured to a chair. Please. She remained standing. I'm still on shift, she said. The woman with the tablet blinked. You were suspended. Christina's voice was even, not formally. The silver-haired man smiled faintly. She's still on shift, he said. No one argued. Outside the room, Dr. Price paced. What is happening? He demanded of anyone who would listen. Why is the military running my ER? A senior nurse finally turned on him. Because you threw out the only person who knew what she was doing, she said. Price scoffed. She's a nurse. The nurse held his gaze. So was Florence Nightingale. Price opened his mouth, closed it again. Inside Trauma 2, the soldier's condition stabilized marginally. A SEAL medic leaned close to the bedside, speaking low. She's here, he said. Yeah, her. The soldier's fingers twitched. Recognition without consciousness. Back in the conference room, the woman with the tablet spoke. We reviewed the footage, she said. Both incidents. Christina nodded once. You violated civilian medical protocol, the woman continued. Yes, and military field protocol, the man beside her added. Yes, a pause. And yet, the silver-haired man said, both patients are alive. That's your pattern, he added. Christina said nothing. The woman studied her. Why did you leave? She asked. Christina met her eyes. Because I was done. Done with what? Christina considered the question. Counting, she said. The room went still. No one asked her to explain. They didn't need to. Outside, the pediatric surgeon finally cornered a SEAL medic. Who is she? He asked. The medic hesitated, then answered. She taught my instructor. That's not possible. The medic shrugged. It is. The conference room door opened briefly as another man entered. Younger, athletic, controlled energy. He leaned down and whispered something to the silver-haired man. The man's expression tightened. Thank you, he said. The younger man nodded to Christina as he left. Respect. Clear. Unmistakable. Christina noticed. She always noticed. The woman with the tablet exhaled. The child's parents are asking questions, she said. The hospital administration is asking more. Christina nodded. They should. And the media will follow, the woman added. Eventually. Christina's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I don't want that, she said. The silver-haired man leaned forward. You never do. In the hallway, administrators argued in hushed, frantic tones. This could destroy us. This could save us. We need statements. A SEAL standing nearby spoke without turning. You need to stay out of the way. They did. Back inside, the silver-haired man stood. We'll handle the jurisdictional mess, he said. Your status here is unresolved. Christina nodded. I'll finish my shift, she said again. The woman with the tablet frowned. That may not be wise. Christina met her gaze. People are still dying, she said, whether I'm here or not. The silver-haired man studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Finish your shift, he said. We'll talk later. Christina left the room. As she walked back toward the ER, conversations died around her. People stepped aside, not out of fear, out of understanding. She re-entered Trauma 1. The child slept now, chest rising evenly, color returning. The mother stood nearby, tear-streaked, exhausted. She looked up at Christina. You're the nurse, she said softly. Christina nodded. The woman's voice broke. Thank you. Christina rested a hand briefly on the bed rail. Get some rest, she said. She'll need you when she wakes up. Christina turned back toward the nurse's station. The monitors continued their steady rhythms. The hospital breathed on. But it would never be the same. By mid-morning, the hospital had found a new rhythm. It was quieter, but not calmer. Word had spread, not through announcements or emails, but through the glances people exchanged, and the way conversations stopped when Christina walked past. Staff who had barely noticed her before now watched her with careful interest, as if she might change shape if stared at too long. She hated that part. Christina preferred the work when it was simple. When needs spoke louder than names, she resumed her duties without ceremony, checking vitals, updating charts, assisting where needed. No one tried to stop her. No one tried to command her either. They didn't know how. At the nurse's station, a resident cleared his throat as she approached. Christina? She looked up. I just wanted to say, about earlier. I should have listened. Christina nodded once. Next time, do. That was all. The resident flushed and stepped aside. Doctor, Price remained in his office. He hadn't come out since the helicopters arrived. Inside, he sat rigidly at his desk, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles ached. His phone buzzed every few minutes. Calls from administration, from legal, from people whose numbers he recognized, and people whose numbers he didn't. He ignored them all. What replayed in his mind wasn't the argument. It was the way the seal had said she is. Not she was. Not she claims. She is. Authority didn't argue. It simply existed. Christina was restocking supplies when the SEAL medic approached her again. He hesitated, then spoke quietly. They want to move him. She knew who him was. The commander. The medic nodded. As soon as he's stable enough for transport. Christina considered. Not yet. The medic frowned. They're pushing. They can, she said. They shouldn't. Why? Christina looked toward Trauma 2. Because his body's still fighting an old war. The medic studied her, then nodded. I'll delay. In Trauma 2, the soldier stirred again. His eyes opened briefly. Just a sliver. Christina was there when it happened. She leaned close, her voice low and steady. You're safe, she said. Don't rush it. His fingers twitched. Then his eyes closed again. The monitor steadied. Outside the bay, the pediatric surgeon watched through the glass. He turned to a colleague. She doesn't behave like hospital staff. The colleague replied, she behaves like someone used to consequences. The silver-haired man returned to the hospital floor shortly after. This time, he walked alone. He found Christina in the supply room, checking expiration dates. You always do that yourself? He asked. Yes. You don't have to. I know. He leaned against the doorframe. The administration is nervous, he said. They want resolution. Christina didn't look up. Resolution is a luxury, he smiled faintly. You haven't changed. People don't, she said. They just get better at hiding it. He watched her work for a moment. You could leave, he said. Right now, no questions, no statements. Christina sealed a box and set it aside. And the next one? She asked. And the one after that? He didn't answer. She finally looked at him. This place needs to learn, she said. Not about me, about itself. He nodded slowly. That may hurt. Christina's expression softened just slightly. It already does, she said. In the hallway, the child's mother slept in a chair, head tilted against the wall. A nurse draped a blanket over her. Christina paused, watching. Then she turned away. By afternoon, tension sharpened again. A call came in, external. High level, voices lowered across the department. The SEAL commander's condition fluctuated. Internal bleeding worsened. The surgical team hesitated. Operating now carried risk. Waiting carried more. Dr. Price reappeared, summoned by necessity rather than pride. He stood outside Trauma 2, staring at the chart. "We need consensus," he said stiffly. Christina stepped forward. "You don't," she said. "You need action." Price turned on her. "You don't get to decide." He stopped. The SEAL medic was already looking at her. "So what do we do?" the medic asked. Price's mouth tightened. Christina pointed at the chart. "Damage control surgery," she said. "Limited exposure. Stop the bleed. Don't chase perfection." "That's not standard here," Price snapped. "It is where he came from." The medic nodded. "She's right." Price looked between them. For the first time, uncertainty crept into his voice. "If we fail?" Christina met his eyes. "You already are." The operating room was prepped in silence. No arguments, no raised voices. Christina scrubbed in, not as lead, not as guest, as necessity. As the doors closed behind them, the hospital held its breath. The operating room was colder than the rest of the hospital. It always was. Lights burned down from the ceiling in perfect circles, bleaching color from skin and fabric alike. Stainless steel reflected everything and remembered nothing. The air smelled sharp, cleaner, thinner, almost metallic. Christina stood at the scrub sink, water running over her forearms, eyes unfocused but alert. She scrubbed the way she always did. Thorough, efficient, unhurried. Not ritual. Preparation. Across the room, Dr. Price adjusted his gloves with quick, irritated snaps. His jaw was set, shoulders rigid beneath the sterile gown. "This is not how things are done," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "No." One responded. The anesthesiologist glanced between them, then fixed his eyes on the monitor. The surgical nurse finished laying out instruments with deliberate care. They all felt it, the quiet shift in gravity. This room had chosen. The patient was wheeled in, already pale beneath the lights. The soldier's chest rose unevenly, breath assisted by the ventilator. Numbers flickered on the monitors, heart rate unstable, pressure barely holding. "Time?" Price asked. "Running out," Christina replied. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Price hesitated, scalpel hovering just above the skin. "This is my call," he said, as if reminding himself. "Then make it." Something in her tone, flat, unchallenging, unsettled him more than defiance would have. He nodded sharply. Incision. The first cut opened more than flesh. Blood welled immediately, darker than it should have been. The suction struggled to keep up. Pressure's dropping. Anesthesia called out. "Pack it," Price snapped. Christina was already there, hands moving, packing efficiently, directing pressure exactly where it needed to go. Not guessing, knowing. "There," she said. "That's the source." Price followed her gaze. Shrapnel had torn through muscle and tissue in a jagged path. But the real damage lay deeper, where the body had tried and failed to seal itself. "This isn't textbook," Price muttered. "No," Christina said. "It's survival." Minutes stretched. Sweat gathered beneath gowns. The room filled with the sound of suction, monitors, controlled breathing. Price worked harder now, faster, but his movements were losing precision. Fatigue crept in, subtle, but deadly. Christina noticed. She adjusted without comment, repositioning instruments, guiding hands back to the correct plane. When she spoke, it was only to name what mattered. "Clamp. Not there. 2 centimeters lower. Wait." At first, Price bristled. Then he stopped fighting it. Outside the OR, the hospital had gone eerily still. Administrators hovered behind glass, watching numbers they didn't fully understand. SEALs stood motionless in the corridor, eyes fixed on the doors, unreadable. The pediatric surgeon stood nearby, arms crossed tightly. "She shouldn't be in there," he whispered. A nurse beside him replied, "She shouldn't have had to be." Inside the OR, The soldier's vitals dipped sharply. Arrhythmia, anesthesia warned. Price froze. For half a second, just long enough. Christina stepped in. She adjusted the defibrillator pads with practiced ease, voice calm and clear. Clear. The shock jolted the body. Once. Twice. The rhythm corrected. The room exhaled. Price stared at the monitor, then at her. "You didn't even ask," he said quietly. Christina didn't look at him. "There wasn't time," she replied. The bleeding slowed, then stopped. Silence filled the room, broken only by the steady, precious sound of a stabilized heartbeat. "We have control," Price said finally. No one celebrated. Christina stepped back, hands lowering, eyes scanning for any sign of retreating stability. "This is temporary," she said, "but it's enough." For the first time since this began, he didn't look angry. He looked humbled. As they closed, Price spoke again. Christina paused. "About what?" "About who you are." She met his eyes. "Because it shouldn't matter," she said. He swallowed. "It does," he said. Christina shook her head. "Only because you made it." When the doors opened, the waiting corridor leaned forward as one. The silver-haired man straightened. Price emerged first, mask lowered. "He's alive," he said. Relief moved through the room like wind through grass. Then Christina stepped out. A SEAL took one step forward, then stopped. He didn't speak. He simply inclined his head. One by one, the others followed. No salutes. No ceremony. Just acknowledgement. "Doctor," Price watched it happen, and understood, too late, that authority wasn't something you declared. It was something others chose to recognize. Christina removed her cap and gloves, dropping them into the bin. Her shift wasn't over yet. There was still work to do. The corridor outside the operating room did not erupt. There were no cheers, no raised voices, no visible relief. Just a collective release, like a held breath finally let go. The silver-haired man closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. One of the SEALs spoke softly into a radio, voice controlled but unmistakably lighter. "Package is stable. Repeat, stable." Across the hall, a nurse sank into a chair without realizing she had done it. Her hands trembled now that there was nothing left to do. Christina noticed. She always noticed. She crossed the hallway and crouched in front of the nurse, her voice low. "Drink some water," she said, slow breaths. The nurse nodded, embarrassed. "Thank you," she whispered. Christina stood and turned away before the gratitude could linger. Dr. Price remained near the OR doors. He watched Christina move down the hall, already transitioning back into the rhythm of the hospital, already blending in again. For the first time since she'd arrived months earlier, he truly looked at her. Not her badge, not her role. Her. And what unsettled him most was not her skill, it was how little she seemed to need acknowledgement. The silver-haired man approached her near the nurse's station. "This is where it becomes complicated," he said quietly. Christina finished entering a note into the system before replying. "It already is," he nodded. "There will be reports," he said. "Questions. Statements." Christina looked up. "I won't lie. We wouldn't ask you to. And I won't perform," she added. "Not for cameras, not for committees." He studied her face. "You never did," he said. Across the hospital, administrators were scrambling. Phones rang unanswered. Legal counsel spoke in hushed tones. A carefully rehearsed sense of control had collapsed into reactive confusion. One administrator finally confronted the silver-haired man. "We need to know who she is," he insisted. "This hospital's reputation?" The man cut him off without raising his voice. "Your reputation survived today because of her," he said. "It will survive the truth, too." The administrator faltered. "What truth?" "That you didn't recognize excellence when it was standing in front of you." In Trauma 1, the child stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused but alive. Her mother gasped and leaned forward, tears spilling freely now. "She's waking up," she whispered. "She's waking up." The pediatric surgeon checked vitals. disbelief still coloring his movements. "She's stable," he said. "Fully stable." The mother looked around frantically. "Where's the nurse?" she asked. "The one from before?" Christina stood in the doorway. The mother's face crumpled as she reached out, fingers clutching Christina's sleeve. "You saved her," she said. "You saved my baby." Christina gently disentangled herself and smiled. Small, sincere. "She saved herself," she said. "I just gave her time." That moment, quiet, raw, human, did more to seal the truth than any briefing ever could. The SEALs saw it. So did the staff. This wasn't about rank. This was about service. By late afternoon, word had reached higher than the hospital. Very high. A black sedan arrived at the emergency entrance, unmarked but unmistakable. The man who stepped out wore a suit that didn't wrinkle and an expression that didn't invite conversation. He spoke briefly with the silver-haired man. Then he asked one question. "Where is Christina Hale?" She was in the supply room again, counting. When they came for her this time, it wasn't security. It was acknowledgement. The man in the suit spoke first. "You were recommended for commendation," he said. Christina closed the cabinet. "I don't want one." He hesitated. "That's not how this works." Christina met his eyes. "It is for me." A long pause followed. Then the man nodded once. "Then we'll do this your way." Dr. Price watched from the corridor. He saw the exchange, the respect, the way no one interrupted her. He realized then that consequences were coming. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. As the day staff rotated out and evening crept closer, the hospital began to return to something resembling normal. But something fundamental had shifted. Nurses spoke more freely. Residents listened longer. And when Christina walked past, people didn't step aside because they were told to. They did it because they trusted her. She finished her shift on time. She always did. At the exit, the silver-haired man stopped her one last time. "You could teach," he said, officially. Christina considered. "Maybe," she said, "if they're willing to listen." He smiled. "They will be now." Christina stepped out into the evening air. The rotors were gone. The noise had faded. But the lesson remained. The hospital looked ordinary again the next morning. Sunlight poured through the glass atrium, catching dust motes in slow motion. The smell of coffee returned. The gift shop opened on time. Volunteers in pastel vests wheeled carts of magazines down familiar corridors. But beneath the surface, nothing was the same. Christina arrived 10 minutes early, as she always did. She changed into fresh scrubs, clipped on her badge, and paused for a moment in the locker room, resting her hands on the cool metal bench. For the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't expected to feel here. Weight, not fatigue, not fear. Attention. At the morning briefing, Dr. Price stood at the front of the room. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically, he was the same man in the same white coat. But something essential had drained out of his posture. The certainty, the unchallenged authority. He cleared his throat. "Before we begin," he said, "there will be changes." Murmurs rippled through the room. Price glanced at Christina, then away. "Effective immediately, trauma protocols will be revised to include expanded nurse-led emergency authority under defined conditions." Several heads snapped up. "That decision," Price continued, voice tight, "comes from administration and from me." He paused. "I was wrong yesterday." Silence followed. It was not forgiving silence. It was listening silence. After the briefing, a resident approached Christina, hesitating. "I wanted to ask," he said, lowering his voice. "How did you know when to act?" "When the cost of waiting becomes higher than the cost of acting," she said. He nodded slowly, as if filing the answer somewhere deep. The formal inquiry began at noon. A conference room. Neutral walls. Bottled water untouched on the table. Christina sat across from a panel that included hospital administrators, legal counsel, and one unfamiliar face, the man in the suit from the day before. No one spoke for several seconds. Then the administrator cleared his throat. "For the record," he said, "state your name." "Christina Hale," she replied. "Your position?" "Registered nurse." "And your actions yesterday?" Christina raised a hand slightly. "If you're asking whether I'd do it again," she said calmly, "the answer is yes." The man in the suit leaned back. "That wasn't the question," he said. "It's the only answer that matters," Christina replied. Another silence followed, longer this time. The administrator closed his folder. "I believe we're done here," he said. The consequences came quietly. Dr. Price was reassigned, not fired, not publicly disgraced, removed from leadership, his authority redistributed, his decisions now subject to review. He accepted it without protest. When he crossed paths with Christina later that afternoon, he stopped her. "I owe you an apology," he said. Christina looked at him. "You owe the next patient better," she replied. "Give them that." Price nodded. "I will." It was the first honest exchange they'd ever had. By the end of the week, Christina was asked, formally this time, to lead training sessions, not lectures, workshops, hands-on, scenario-based, focused on judgment under pressure. She agreed on one condition. "No titles," she said. "No introductions." They honored it. In the first session, a young nurse asked her quietly, "Why are you doing this?" Christina adjusted a monitor and answered without looking up. "So you don't have to learn the hard way," she said. The soldier was transferred 3 days later. Before he left, a SEAL team gathered outside his room. Christina stood at the back, unobtrusive. The commander, still weak but conscious, turned his head slightly. His eyes found her. He nodded once. No words. They were unnecessary. On her way out that evening, Christina passed the pediatric ward. The child sat up in bed, coloring. She looked up and smiled. Christina raised a hand in return, then kept walking. She didn't stop. She never lingered where she wasn't needed. That night, as the hospital settled into its quieter rhythm, a new nurse walked the halls with a little more confidence. A resident spoke up sooner. A doctor listened longer. None of them mentioned Christina by name. They didn't have to. Some heroes announce themselves. Others leave behind a change so subtle it feels like it was always meant to be there. Christina preferred the second kind. The offer came quietly. No envelope slid across a desk. No dramatic summons. Just a message left with the charge nurse near the end of Christina's shift. "They'd like to speak with you," the nurse said. "When you have a moment." After handoff, she finished her charting first. Always. Closed loops. Clean endings. Only then did she walk toward the administrative wing. The child came back to visit in the spring. She wore a bright yellow jacket and held her mother's hand tightly as they walked through the lobby. She looked around with open curiosity, unafraid. Christina was charting when she felt the tug on her sleeve. The girl smiled up at her. "Hi," she said. "I remember you." Christina smiled back. "That's good," she said. "Memory means you're healing." The mother's eyes shone. "She wanted to see you," she said. "To say thank you." Christina crouched slightly. "Take care of yourself," she told the girl. "That's thanks enough." The girl nodded solemnly. They left. Christina returned to her chart. The soldier recovered slowly. There were setbacks, pain, long nights. But he recovered. A year later, a sealed envelope arrived at the nurse's station. Inside was a simple note. "Because of you, my daughter has a future." No signature. Christina folded it once and placed it in her locker. The silver-haired man visited less often. When he did, they spoke briefly, casually, about systems, about people. One day he asked, "Do you ever regret saying no?" Christina shook her head. "No," she said. "I regret every time I didn't act." He nodded. "That's what I thought." Hospitals, like people, rarely remember lessons forever, but some changes stuck. Nurses were empowered sooner, residents listened longer, authority softened just enough to let wisdom through. Christina never demanded credit. She didn't need it. One evening, as she prepared to leave, a new nurse stopped her at the door. I heard stories about you, the nurse said. From before. Christina raised an eyebrow. What stories? The nurse smiled nervously. That you were something else. Before here. Then she said, before here, I was still me. The hospital at night returned to its old voice, the low hum of machines, the distant echo of footsteps, the steady, patient breathing of a place built to hold pain without collapsing under it. Christina walked the corridor one last time before heading home, checking doors, glancing at monitors, adjusting a blanket here, a drip there, because it mattered. A resident passed her and nodded, not nervously, not reverently, just respectfully, as one professional to another. That, more than anything, felt right. In the trauma bay, where everything had changed, another patient lay sleeping now. Not a soldier, not a child, just an ordinary man who would wake up tomorrow and never know how close he'd come to not waking up at all. Christina paused at the doorway. This was where power had questioned her authority, and where it had lost the right to do so. The hospital never put her name on a wall. There was no plaque, no portrait, no ceremony. What it gained instead was something harder to measure, a culture that listened, a system that bent just enough to save lives. Somewhere far from the hospital, a soldier tucked his daughter into bed. Somewhere else, a young nurse trusted her judgment for the first time. And somewhere in the quiet, a once arrogant voice learned what it meant to stand back. Christina stepped outside into the cool night air. The city lights blinked steadily, indifferent and alive. Traffic hummed. Life continued. She walked to her car, unhurried. Tomorrow, she would return, not as a legend, not as a commander, but as what she had always been, a nurse who knew when to act. There are heroes who demand recognition, and there are those who leave behind something better than memory. They leave behind change. Christina was one of them. Like, subscribe, and comment what you would have done.